Good afternoon. This is Robin Harvey, Vice Chair of the Policy Review Committee, and I now call to order the March 17, 2025 meeting of the Policy Review Committee of the Baltimore County Board of Education. In accordance with Board Policy 8311, the chair of a committee, at their discretion, and after consultation with the staff liaison, may convene an in-person committee meeting. Otherwise, all committee meetings will be held electronically. Today's Policy Review Committee meeting is being held virtually and broadcast through Microsoft Teams live on the BCPS website. To conduct this meeting by virtual means, all voting items this afternoon will be done by a roll call vote. Board members will say their names before making and seconding a motion as applicable, as well as when requesting discussion on an agenda item. Additionally, as a courtesy to the committee, I ask that you inform Ms. Wash, Ms. Pitts, or Ms. Howie if you must leave the call by using the Teams chat feature so that a quorum can be maintained. Ms. Pitts, please call the roll to determine the presence of a quorum of the committee.
Good afternoon, Ms. Harvey. This is Ms. Stifler in for Ms. Pitts.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Ms. Frimpong.
Present.
Ms. Harvey.
Present.
Ms. Hen. Ms. Sterlusky.
Present.
Ms. Pumphrey. Ms. Chigakalu.
Present.
4 are present, Ms. Harvey.
Thank you. Ms. Stifler, will you please call the roll to determine which staff members are present in this meeting?
Yes, ma'am. Dr. DiDonato.
Present.
Dr. Graham. Dr. Jones.
Present.
Mr. Connolly.
Present.
Dr. Kraft.
Present.
Dr. Elmendorf.
Present.
Mr. Knox.
Present.
Ms. Onajala.
Present.
Dr. D. Gaines.
Present.
Dr. Koff. Dr. Roberts. Dr. Roberts. Ms. Hahn.
Present.
Mr. Kearns.
Present.
Ms. Howie.
Here.
Ms. Wash.
Here.
Were there any staff members that I may have missed?
Hi, my name is Robin Hawley Relante.
Thank you, Ms. Rolante.
Thank you. So we'll jump right in and begin with policy 1270, which is on the 2024-2025 review schedule, parent and family engagement. And for that, I will call on Ms. Onijala and appropriate staff.
Good afternoon and thank you. I will ask Ms. Hahn.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Good evening. I am here to present to you the annual review of Policy 1270, Family and Community Engagement. The updates that were made were to the policy statement and the staff is recommending that the policy be revised to reflect the board's goals and to make the terminology consistent with the Policy Review Committee's editing conventions.
Are there any questions? Ms. Hen, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I have one, if my
Absolutely,
colleagues
please
have none,
proceed.
but I can wait my turn.
Oh, go ahead, Ms. Hen.
Thank you. So my question about this policy is, I read in the analysis that there was a note that it was updated to reflect the board goals, which were updated on September 24th, I believe. And my question is, which exact board goals were referenced? If staff could speak to that, please.
Yes, so it's the board goal that connects to community engagement. And it, as there, the goals are listed on the website. Your
Thank
goals
you.
that,
I did read, I went back and read the board goals,
uh-huh.
and it speaks specifically to board responsibilities. So I was trying to connect this policy in particular to our goals, which speak to student success and academic achievement. And the reason I ask is because I'm concerned that our focus on student success and academic achievement seems to have gotten lost with these changes. And when I went through the other LEA policies, their focus does seem to be on that primary focus of the importance of parent and family and community involvement and just how important those partners are in student success. And when I read through the changes, and I have no problem with the changes as is, I didn't see that same focus. When you look at the section that's been struck, what we lose there is that focus, which is throughout our board goals. So I like what's been done in the changes. I'm just concerned that we lose that emphasis on student success, which is why we're all here, right? So I was curious as to um, where that is in the changes, if you wouldn't mind speaking to that, please.
Where what your goals within this policy? Is that what
No,
you're speaking?
our goals and the former version of this policy,
Yes,
the emphasis is on academic success of our students, which is
yes.
why we're all here. And even in the other LEA policies, they emphasize the partnership with our families, with our community partners. They emphasize that that partnership, the purpose of which is on our student outcomes and their academic success. And if you look at the changes that are proposed to this policy,
Mhm.
that focus has been removed in the language that's being recommended. I I have no concern with the language that's been added. My concern is what's been taken away, and that
Yes.
is our goal of student success. So my question is, where is that in the language that's being proposed? And
Mhm.
if it's there, then I may have missed it. But can you speak to the thought process behind how we're going to maintain that emphasis? Because I think it's really important, and that's, in our goals, it's prevalent in there. If you look at other LEA policies, they emphasize that that's the purpose of the partnership, right? Is we want positive outcomes for our students, and their emphasis, and I think they have some really great language in their policies, is the importance of family engagement, of home, um, involvement with students in this, and the responsibilities that families share with us
Right.
in learner outcomes.
So, I will go off of my experience from last year in that board members, the way the policy was written and what you see was taken out, mentioned that these were not their goals. I think you're in the process of rewriting your goals. So I kind of took your lead in the fact of just using the board goals as listed on the website to mirror in the policy. And then I guess, and of course, we have the rule, which breaks down a lot of the partnership and family engagement and research, which you see in a lot of LEAs, other LEAs policies. Um, uh, but we put a lot of that in our rule.
And if I could just add, Ms. Hen, I think if I'm understanding what you're referencing, you're talking specifically about the policy statement and where that edit was made.
Correct.
Yes, so I think the spirit and the intent of the policy remains. You're speaking specifically to the removal of the sentence around that the board believes that family and community engagement plays a critical role in supporting the board's vision of increasing academic achievement. So I think what you see here is the tightening up of the language, the overarching goal of the board to support community engagement and communication, which therefore has an impact on student achievement. So if I'm understanding your suggestion or your concern is that you would like for it to, again, more explicitly state that the board goal of community engagement and communication has an impact on student achievement. Would that be
You
correct?
summarized it beautifully. That's exactly what I was saying.
Okay.
And under points A and B in the language that's being removed, it may even be in C. Yes, in the language that's being removed under policy statement, A, B, and C, or excuse me, B and C, we reference academic achievement. And I think that's really important language to maintain in this policy. Like I said, it's the emphasis in the other LEA statements. It's in our goals, and I did want to reference that throughout our moral imperative. If you have that, I can put the link in the chat if you need it. But states all students can and will learn in safe, inclusive, and high quality teaching and learning environments. The last statement of the first paragraph states, we believe that all students can achieve excellence when challenged appropriately and assisted to achieve. So I do believe strongly, and as stated here, the board believes that all students can learn. We believe that the purpose of this partnership, of the engagement, of the involvement is the ultimate outcome of our students learning. And I think I see that the intent is to clean up the languages, to streamline it, and that's great. Like I said, I like the language that's been included here now, but I think it may have been too streamlined that we took that out. I would just like to see that returned because ultimately that's our goal. Of course, we want to communicate with our partners, but I think our ultimate goal is academic achievement.
Understood. Thank you for that feedback.
No, thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Thank you, Ms. Henn. Are there other comments or questions?
This is board member from Pong, and I had question/comment.
Please proceed, Ms. Frimpong.
Thank you. So there was a lot of discussion that just happened with Ms. Henn's question. And so what I'm saying, I'm not quite sure if it's the same thing or not, but I noticed in the policy, so the original policy, when you look at 1A, B, and C, A had board commitments, B had the board's vision, C had the board's goals. And so it looks like the edit or the revision was taking and rewriting, paraphrasing, if you want to say rewriting C and putting that as the original statement, which I'm fine with. But my question was, could we still keep the previous A and B as far as the commitments and the vision in support of what they had put on top? Because I think the entire, I think all of it is still needed and that we shouldn't be getting rid of A and B. That is fine.
Yes. And I know
So-
part of that.
So
oh,
members
I'm
of the committee, if you could give us your consensus as to what changes you would like to see, so that staff knows exactly what you want when staff goes back and does some rewrites.
Thank you, Ms. Howie. Are there any other comments before we engage in that discussion? Any other board members have any comments or questions? Okay, so let us tell the staff what it is that we specifically would like to see in this policy. It sounds like we're saying the previous language in section, is it B and C? Ms. Henn and Ms. Frimpong, please jump in.
So my understanding is that Ms. Frempong wanted the language in A and B and Ms. Henn in B and C.
This is Ms. Henn, that's correct. I would also like to see the goals, or as a possibility, instead of the language in C for the policy statement of the board's goals, to be edited to indicate that the goals are the academic and personal success of all students. So in other words, replacing the language in the policy statement with that last sentence from C, or the last phrase from C, the academic and personal success of all students. If Ms. Frempong is amenable to that.
Ms. Hen, just as a clarification, you're saying you'd like that added in the policy statement or changed in both the policy statement and in C?
As long as it's in there, I don't have a strong preference either way. I believe the goals should state that the academic and personal success of all students are our ultimate goals rather than community engagement and communication. Currently, the recommendation is that that is under the policy statement. If we want to leave that there, which I believe is what Ms. Frempong suggested, and keep A and B, I'm fine with
So
that.
great.
But I
So
also like it under, I also like C. So if we want to include, keep A, B, and C and have the policy statement, there might be some redundancy. But I believe it's important to state that our goals are academic and personal success of students.
okay, so
I know that's
just so
clear
I'm
as mud,
clear.
Madam Chair.
No, no, you're fine. I just want because this policy is about how the system how the board believes the system should engage the community. And so I see why staff streamlined it to focus specifically on that. So, if we retain A, B, and C and we add into the policy statement and recognizes them as important partners in implementing the board's goals of academic achievement or whatever that language would be through robust community engagement and communication. Would that meet your suggestion? I don't want to lose the community engagement and communication piece because that is this policy, and I understand the emphasis on putting in there why we think it's important to engage with community in this way. So
Absolutely. And if I may, Madam Chair, I believe that may be somewhat redundant to the first part of the statement. It also seems to cross into operations a smidge, only because under Roman numeral 2 standards, we state that the superintendent will establish guidelines for the development of parent and family engagement programs. So I read this as the goals of community engagement and communication would be the superintendent's goals rather than ours. And when I revisited our goals to find, okay, is this listed as our goals? That is not listed specifically as our goals. We have a section on community engagement and communication. However, it discusses other things such as our engagement with the area education advisory councils and things that are not included in this policy but are included in other policies. So that said to me, okay, this is a superintendent goal. This doesn't belong in our board policy, but it belongs in the superintendent's role. So it felt more appropriate to, since this discusses board goals and it's our policy, to focus on academic achievement in that sentence in the policy and stay in our lane and let the superintendent have her goals of community engagement. But that was my read on this.
So members of the committee, I don't believe that it was staff's intent to direct the board policy about the board's goals. I believe that staff's intent was to indicate that one of the board's own goals was to have a robust system and process for communication and engagement of families that is tied to better communication. And if that turns into something that the board wants to use to shape and craft directives to the superintendent, then that part becomes operational on the superintendent's side. But certainly if one of your goals already is to have robust communication with families and with community partners, we're not adding to the superintendent's plate. We're simply articulating, or at least trying to articulate, one of the values and the goals that the board holds. If I'm hearing correctly from you, Ms. Hen, and from Ms. Frempong, you like A, B, and C already? So perhaps what staff can do is more wordsmithing, but with the understanding, as has already been expressed and summarized, that we include in some way academic success as the ultimate goal of all of these communication methods. Would that be accurate, members of the committee?
I think that is reflective. Ms. Frempong is in agreement. Yep. Ms. Hen also.
And hi, this is Ms. Delusky. I think that sounds great as well.
Okay. Okay, so
Thank
thank
you.
you, Ms. Howie and team, for taking that back and making those edits.
Thank you for the feedback.
So
Thank
it's our
you.
understanding that this is being returned, and that is the committee's pleasure. We will work on it again. Sure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll move more forward with policy 5550, Conduct Student Behavior Code. And for
And
that, I'm sorry.
my apologies. May staff be excused who came to present on policy 1270.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues.
Have a good evening.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. 5550 on the review schedule and was rescheduled from our February 3rd meeting. If I could have Dr. Jones and your appropriate staff.
Good evening, Vice Chair Harvey, and members of the Policy Review Committee. I am here to share information around the policy analysis for Policy 5550 in accordance with Board of Education Policy and Superintendent's Rule 8130. Policy 5550 is scheduled for review in this year, 2024-2025. Policy 550 describes behavioral expectations, including how students are expected to conduct themselves without disrupting the orderly operation of school or interfering with another student's right to school. A series of meetings have taken place since last school year, and even during this year to ensure that we were able to solicit input as it relates to the student code of conduct and the discipline process. I am joined by Mr. Eric Knox, the new Executive Director of Safety, and Dr. Roberts, who is the Director of School Climate and Culture. Principals were organized by level. Safety community conferences were held by the superintendent, and student conversations were had at the school level. As a direct result of the feedback provided by stakeholders, Policy 5550 Student Behavior Code has been formally added to, as you all know, the Policy Review Committee's agenda. And the policy that we are presenting for the committee's consideration contains the following revisions. The changes proposed are the related to technology. Stakeholders offered revisions that were proposing a list of offenses revised to address technology and the misuse of technology at the school level, involving artificial intelligence or AI. Those subcategories involve areas of technology and safety, such as attacks and threats and fighting, and other areas involving attack, fighting, and dangerous substances as it relates to safety. Another area that came out of the input of the various stakeholders was formatting, and it was proposed that Section 2 definitions for terms referenced in the policy are being moved from Section 3 to Section 2, and then standards would be moved from Section 2 to Section 3. Again, staff is proposing that the accepted revisions related to technology, safety, and formatting be effective for the start of the 2025-2026 school year. And at this time, we'll entertain questions and answer questions from the committee. Thank you.
Are there any questions? I
This
have,
is,
I'm sorry, go ahead. Ms. Frimpong, was that Ms. Frimpong?
that was me. Thank you. You can
Go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Ms. Frimp. No, go ahead. Please proceed.
Okay. I had quite a few questions and comments. Again, I don't know. I'm happy to defer to you, Board Member Harvey, because I do have a lot. You may have some of the questions that I had.
No, sure. Please proceed, Ms. Frimpong.
Okay, thank you. So with this one, 5550, and it's talking about the, I'm trying to get back to the right screen because I want to say it clearly. Okay, so this is for conduct and student behavior conduct. One of the things that was talked about was the lens and how are we looking at this to see whether or not the impact. And it was interesting to me that it said that while recognizing that there's disparities, it didn't, I guess, cause any additional harm, I guess, if you want to say. Um, but there were a couple of things in this policy that I thought we could address to help make it a better fit. So we know that students of color and then also our students of special education, unfortunately, they receive higher levels of consequences for their behavior. So even, for example, if we look at section 4A.1O, which is the new item, and N was the former item. So there is the opportunity to suspend a child for a refusal to do the assigned work. And so again, I think about, for example, our students who have special needs and our special education students, the impact on something like that for them. Or when we look at 4A1.K, which is the new one, J is the former, a suspension for failure to follow a direction, such as but not limited to a failure to report to office when directed by school staff to do so. So I appreciate how these are laid out, but there's just still, like I said, some concern about how this is really being done. So for line item IA, lines 10 through 11, when we are establishing the clear expectations, I believe it should also be and consistent expectations. And then when we look at lines 11 through 12, it talks about supports and interventions, but the way I read that, it was more just of a reactive response to whatever the behavior was that wasn't desired. But can we add some more language or wording around the proactive supports and interventions, or is that already implied? So I'll stop there at least just for that first part.
So, with respect to students with disabilities, I would ask Dr. Roberts to address the process that is used concerning manifestation determinations. And Ms. Frempong, I think staff is going to need more explicit direction about specifically which language you'd like changed. I'm afraid I did not follow some of your directives in terms of where you wanted language added. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Roberts if he's available to answer. Dr. Roberts, are you there?
Ms. Howie, I don't believe Dr. Roberts is on the call at this time.
His, I see his name, and that's true. He did not post as present, but he is logged in. Is there someone else from your staff who can explain the manifestation determination? I'm happy to do so if no one's here.
Would you be able to do that? And I'm going to contact Mr. Roberts. Thank you, Dr. Roberts.
So, members of the committee, we're required when a student is identified as a disabled student to, prior to imposing discipline, determine whether or not that student's infraction is a manifestation of that student's disability. And if so, then the school system would be unable to discipline the student. We would have to make sure that some sorts of supports are provided to that individual student. So that is a protection that is assured by federal law and by our processes.
And so I guess, is there language then that needs to be in this section specific to that, or it's just understood that that protection is available to a student with special needs or special education?
It's understood, ma'am, believe me.
Okay. All right. And then you were saying you weren't following. Let me see if I can say it right. So, so 1A, it's Roman numeral 1, section A, and then on lines 10 through 11. So starting with on line 9, the sentence says, the board understands that providing a safe and secure learning environment requires that clear expectations for appropriate behavior be communicated, etc. And so I was saying there to not just have clear expectations, but I would add and consistent to those expectations. And then for lines 11 through 12 of that same sentence, where it talks about supports and interventions be provided and consequences for inappropriate behavior, etc. My question was more so are those supports and interventions available only when there's behavior issues? So that means it's reactive. Or does this also include any type of proactive supports and interventions that we would have for our students?
So I would not want to speak for student safety, but the way I read it is that there are interventions provided for inappropriate behavior. So that presupposes that there has been some inappropriate behavior. And again, this policy is about student behavior and consequences that are provided or imposed, I should say. I'm
Okay.
sorry if that doesn't fully respond to your question, Ms. Frumpong.
No, I understand. So I guess because what it sounds like is, again, this is more of a reactive thing than a proactive based on the way, I guess, that it's written, because is the
I think
idea that this policy, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I think what you're looking for is in other policies,
Okay.
not necessarily in this one.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So then, okay. Okay, I'll still bring up some of the other, I guess, questions or points. So for this same section, this 1A, and it talks about the consequences. I thought that we should also include the idea that the language in this paragraph is not just about the consequences or the actions are not just punitive, but the idea is to like reduce or eliminate the negative behavior, as well as that the consequences should be age and developmentally level appropriate. Would that still apply then to this conduct or this policy as it's written?
May I
I'm
answer,
not
Ms.
sure.
Howard?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Prempah, it does actually apply COMAR, which we use also as guiding principles for student behavior and student discipline. Kind of sets apart pre-K through 2 behaviors, and then of course 3 through 5, and then middle school through high school. So it is implied that there are a separation of the disciplinary actions as it relates to student behaviors, and it is imposed when applying the handbook as it relates to your concern around reducing and eliminating behaviors, but then also making sure that they are age appropriate.
Okay, great, thank you. So through COMAR, okay. And then make sure I got everything. Within section 3A, where it talks about the guidelines for this policy. Yeah, there it is. Okay, so 3A, it talks about that the superintendent shall apply, shall establish guidelines. Are we able to add and training there? And then as part of that, ensuring that the practices are culturally responsive and take into account the varied needs of students?
Ms. Rempar, are you suggesting that that be added as a number as it's enumerated 1, 2, 3, or are you saying at the top for A? Is that your?
Gotcha. Okay, so for A, it instead of just guidelines, it would be guidelines and training. And then for what I was just speaking about, numbers, that would be actually a number 4, where ensure that the practices are culturally responsive and take into account the varied needs of students. And I think it's appropriate to go to follow number 3, because for 3, you specifically speak to the discretion. And I know with our suspensions, we have discretionary versus non-discretionary. But we just saw data because we had in one of our meetings where there is a difference in how discretionary discipline is being applied to our students. So I think that would be appropriate as for number 4 after number 3. Do you want me to
Okay, Ms.
repeat the
Prempah,
wording?
is there language that you have?
Yes, that's what we need.
Gotcha. Okay, so within A, so
Mhm.
3A, after the word guidelines, we would just add 2 words and training.
Okay.
And then it would be a 3A4. And that one would say that ensure the practices are culturally responsive and take into account the varied needs of students.
You said the varied or
Varied,
needs?
VARIED.
Okay, I want to make sure I heard you correctly. Okay.
Yes, that's it.
Mhm.
Needs of students is the rest of that.
Okay, I've made a note of that
Okay,
for consideration.
thank you. And that was, I think, everything for that one. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Frimpong. Are there other comments or questions regarding this policy?
And just a quick question, please, for staff's clarity. Are these being added as amendments by consensus of the committee?
So committee members, is there anyone in disagreement with adding these changes to the policy? Hearing none, I think we have consensus. Thank you, Ms.
Thank
Howe.
you.
Okay, we will move forward
Madam Chair, I
to,
have one additional thing on this policy.
oh, yes, Ms. Hen.
Thank you. It's a small suggestion. On page 6, line 24, I suggest restoring cigarettes to be listed under dangerous substances. It was recommended that we strike that with the replacement as electronic smoking devices. And I believe the more specific we can make that list, the better, so that there is no confusion here, and ask for the committee's consideration of listing that separately.
So I am, thank you, Ms. Hen. I am,
Thank you.
and this probably is an assumption that people can correct me if I'm wrong, is that that was taken out because we would include cigarettes in the possession of tobacco?
Mhm.
Is that the reason, the logic behind that language change?
That was
Doc-
actually the thing. Go
Dr.
ahead.
Jones.
Yep, you can go ahead.
So Vice Chair Harvey, unfortunately, we're at a point in time where tobacco products have expanded so far past just cigarettes that other tobacco, like you saying, it would encompass that because some of the poor decisions just include so many more types of smoking agents at this point.
Ms. Hen, what is your concern? Can you just give us a little bit of background on your concern with that, with having expressly stating cigarettes? Do you think there might be some misunderstanding or confusion in the policy? I just want to make sure we're all clear.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't want to exclude cigarettes and have there be confusion that those are acceptable. And given that they are commonly used, I would not want to exclude those and have there be any confusion. That is my concern. And while this list is not um, all inclusive, or as I said, there are too many types of devices. I think that by excluding that could cause problems unnecessarily, where as it's easy enough to include it. And the analysis listed that we are adding electronic smoking devices, of which cigarettes would not be included, although, like you said, I understand it's included under possession of tobacco. I just think there's, no reason we can't be explicit and include it as well for clarity. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank
Do any
you.
board members have an objection to including cigarettes in this section as part of the list of prohibited items? Hearing none, if you could please add cigarettes back to the language. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Roberts, for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I was having some audio problems. I've been here the whole time.
Thank you. We're glad you got on, or at least got your sound straight. Policy, is there anyone who needs to be dismissed, Ms. Howie, or can we move on to 6304?
I just wanted to make, I'm sorry, Ms. Stileski, I interrupted you.
Yes, good afternoon. Just before we move on, can I just offer one thought?
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you. Okay, thank you so much. I just want to make sure, and I'm sorry I don't have the policy in front of me, but I did make a note knowing that I would be in the car for a bit, that this policy gives us, I guess, coverage for all potential forms of marijuana. I know that the forms have evolved with the gummies and the jellies and the lollipops, and I just want to make sure that we have the accountability piece for that built in. And thank you.
Dr. Roberts?
Yes, we have tried to account for that. There is language in there that says any form, and that would include those edibles or any other form of a drug.
Okay, yeah, perfect. I just wanted to make sure, especially considering, within the time before we revise the policy, other forms may come into play as well. So thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Ms. Zaleski. Ms. Frimpong, did you have your hand up again?
I did. I tried
Okay.
to differentiate by saying new. So with Ms. Hen, she brought up the thought about putting the cigarettes back in. And so she just answered the question in there because actually there was another section in category 2 where the cigarettes had been removed. So I just wanted to make sure if we were just removing it, or I'm sorry, adding it back to that first section, which was the category 1, and ignoring it in category 2, or we were going to keep the instances of the cigarette in both category 1 and category 2.
So my understanding was that you wanted cigarettes restored regardless of where they were.
That was my intent. Thank you.
Surely.
Okay. If there are no more comments or questions, we will move on to the next policy. Ms. Howie, is there anyone who you'd like
Yes,
to
ma'am.
excuse?
Thank you. Yes, ma'am. That would be Dr. Roberts and Mr. Knox.
Okay.
Oh, good evening.
Thank you very much. So we will move on to policy 6304, schedules, commemorations, and observances. And for that, I'll call on Dr. DiDonato and staff as appropriate.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it right over to Dr. Kraft to get us started.
All right, so thank you so much. Good evening. In accordance with Board of Education Policy and Superintendent's Rule 8130, Policy 6304 is scheduled for review in school year 2024-2025. Policy 6304 requires schools to devote a part of the school day to conduct appropriate exercises on days identified by law or by the board as a day of national significance. In meeting, we are recommending adding holidays and observances that are required by the Annotated Code of Maryland and/or state or federal requirements, and adding observances to increase awareness of historically marginalized groups. And so I can take any questions at this point. Thank you so much.
Are there any questions?
This is board member.
Madam Chair, this is Ms. Hen.
Okay, I heard Ms.
sorry.
Frimpong and
Couldn't
then Ms.
hear.
Hen.
Thank you.
So I'm fine with the changes that have been made. I just had a question about, I think it's former numbers in 2A, former numbers 7, 6, 7, and 8. I saw that they were removed and they were not like renumbered. So it looks like we're not doing those at all. And I just had the question about why those 3 specifically were not included.
Yeah, thank you so much. We were actually really, we went back, we actually looked at other school systems policies. We went back to the Annotated Code of Maryland, where it actually lists the policies. And what we were trying to do is align exactly to what is in the Annotated Code of Maryland, with the exception of Juneteenth, which is actually comes from federal law. Everything else is mirrored from the Annotated Code of Maryland. Now, there is a part that says other days of national significance. So we certainly are not saying that those aren't important. We were just trying to align with the Annotated Code of Maryland to be consistent with what we were seeing in other school systems policies across the state.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for the question.
Ms. Hen?
Thank you. My question also had to do with, I'm fine with the additions. I support them. I'm glad to see it. That's wonderful. My question or concern has to do with the removal of Pearl Harbor Day, D-Day, and Patriots Day. And while we're not required to commemorate or observe those according to state law, when I look at our policy and what constitutes which days we do commemorate or observe, and the definition of that, these are days of national significance and which occasions enrich the instructional program. And I thought about erasing those days and what that would mean to our students if we elect to erase those days. I thought about my own children, which days I choose to emphasize with them, which days were important to me personally as a BCPS student, and what exactly what I gained from my own instructional program and what was significant. And I got really sad thinking about if those days had not been part of my instruction. And as a proud American, I thought, these are days that I don't want erased from our curriculum, from our instruction. They're days that as Americans, we need to know about. We need to know about the individuals whose lives were changed forever by these days in history. And by adding days, and again, I support the days we're adding. I don't want to suggest that in any way, but that doesn't mean we can't include and be inclusive of these days either. So I would like to ask my colleagues to consider keeping these days, recognizing the significance of these days as Americans to America's history, to us all, that they do have significance in terms of our instructional program. It in no way diminishes the significance of the other days by including them, and nor does it take away from those days. So I recommend and would like to suggest, if we can approve by consensus, that we strike those lines from the policy 25, 26, and 27, and that we retain those days in our list of standards under 2. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Hen. I have a question prior to polling the committee regarding Ms. Hen's suggestion. How did the committee select these particular? I'm sorry. How did the system select these particular holidays? You said they're within the Maryland code.
Yeah, so what we did was we went back and we looked at it's the annotated Code of Maryland Education Article 7-103, and it's called Required School Days and Holidays. And then in addition, there's another part of the annotated Code of Maryland, which is Education Article 7-116, that also talks about the Constitution Day and Citizenship Day. So we went back to that language, and there were robust discussions. And so I do want to be very clear. It's not that we did not think those were important. And in fact, in a lot of cases, it is part of what is taught in social studies. We had, in fact, we met over 6 times to discuss. And so then finally, because we actually at one point had added in quite a few, and then we were like, okay, well, what does they, and so then when we got to the part where we looked at other counties, we saw that theirs were rather brief. So then we went back to the annotated Code of Maryland. And so certainly we are, happy to have feedback from this committee in terms of what we want to do. Everybody started to add things. And so then it was getting really quite robust. So then we decided just to go back to the annotated Code of Maryland. So again, not to say that those were not significant, but just to be in alignment. That was the only reason.
Thank you. Thank you. I can see how that discussion would result in why this holiday and not that holiday.
And that's where we ended up. And so we, at one point, I think had suggested like 26 different commemorations. And then so like I said, I mean, it was a really robust discussion. And again, not to say these weren't important. And we knew that we would have this discussion also here But we were like, I think for the purposes of simplicity, that we'll just go back to the annotated code of Maryland. But again, we are completely open, and trust me, we went back and forth multiple times, looking at what to keep and what to pare down, knowing that the requirements of when you do a commemoration does require that it says that students shall be encouraged to develop and take part in commemoration and or observance exercises held in conjunctions with any days provided for in subparagraph 2A. So we just, we're also just thinking about, the amount of time that, all of that would happen. So with all that being said, that's what happened, but we are certainly open to revisiting those three.
So I'm looking at the analysis and comparing it to other LEAs, our list, and they seem pretty comparable. Are there any other comments? Is there any discussion around Ms. Henn's suggestion to include D-Day? I want to make sure I have it right. D-Day, Pearl Harbor Day, Patriots Day.
I have one more comment, Madam Chair, but I'll defer to my colleagues first.
Hi, this is Ms. Stileski.
Go ahead, Mr. Lusky.
Okay,
Please
thank
proceed.
you. I actually think it would be really wonderful to have Patriots Day, D-Day, and Pearl Harbor as reinstated in the policy. It's just an opportunity to enhance education a little bit about the 3 days. Perhaps maybe the morning announcements, the students that are involved with that could provide a little bit of information. And I just think it adds a wonderful opportunity to weave those really important days to commemorate into that day when the children are in school. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Henn.
Thank you. Ms. Stileski hit on my point, which is that what this looks like and the time commitment required could vary and could be minimal, right? So I love her example of the morning announcement and recognizing that day. It doesn't need to be a full day of instruction or a full period of instruction, or it could look very different to each school or each class depending on what is appropriate from an instructional perspective. So I would rather be inclusive, even if that list may not be 26. I love that number, but no, I'd rather be inclusive and support adding these special days, these significant days to enrich our students' instructional program than not, and allow our educators this wonderful opportunity to incorporate these significant events in their instruction in ways that they feel are appropriate. And we do give them that flexibility. So I think that the time commitment, the burden, if you will, is minimal. And rather than erasing them, again, it saddens me to think that we might erase them from this policy. It feels like we're erasing history. Now that's not the case. And I know we recognize the importance of the days, but again, I would rather be inclusive and keep them in this policy and allow our wonderful educators the opportunity to allow our students and give our students the opportunity to commemorate them and to teach them the significance of these days in ways that they feel are appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. I think my only hesitation is the fact that there are so many holidays that would meet the same criterion for many people, and they're not listed here. And I think that's why they included the category, that catch-all statement. And while I do agree with Ms. Stileski that these observances of any holiday that's not listed here could be morning announcements or some small gesture within a school system. That would be an operational decision to make. And so I, my preference would be to adhere to the recommendation of uh, the system regarding what's particularly listed, um, or either listing all the holidays.
So Ms. Harvey, might I recommend that that the committee put it to a vote so that it's clear what the committee's pleasure is?
Yes, ma'am. Uh, Ms. Hen, would you please make a motion?
Absolutely. 1 second, please, while I pull up the lines. I move to amend policy 6304 by restoring lines 25, 26, and 27, D-Day, Pearl Harbor Day, and Patriots Day.
Is there a second?
So moved, Stoleski.
Thank you, Ms. Dulesky. It's been moved and properly seconded. May I have a roll call vote, please?
Can I just have one point of discussion before we vote, please?
Yes, ma'am.
This is Ms. Stoleski. Thank you. My only thought hearing all of the comments, and I appreciate hearing everybody's points, is just in terms of naming the holidays, and you're right, Ms. Harvey, there are so many that could apply, but it seems as these three are ones that all Americans can recognize. So I don't feel as though it's, because that is a very important thing to make sure that we are being inclusive, but because those three holidays are specifically American, like American history based, so it is something that every student, since, we are all Americans, every student can identify with in some way, shape, or form. My only comment is that I don't feel that eliminating or not including certain holidays is being exclusive, because I really did appreciate your point that, okay, if we have these holidays, there are so many others that we would need to include, but those other holidays might be specific to, a specific group, but these three would be significant to all students. So that is my thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dulesky. I appreciate that. However, I would disagree. Even a holiday that is specific to a group is specific to a group of Americans. And so I think if we as a state or as a nation has decided to honor a event, a group, a time, then that is because we've decided to honor that as Americans. And so, again, my point would be the list should be all inclusive or based on the recommendations of our colleagues. And so, is there any other discussion?
Madam Chair, may I speak to my motion briefly?
Yes, ma'am. Please
Thank
proceed.
you. Number 9 in this list lists other days of national significance, which allows, again, our educators the freedom to allow students to commemorate or celebrate other days, and again, opens up the possibility for even greater inclusivity for days that our students want to commemorate, and even broaden that educational experience. So I think that addresses your concern, at least to some degree, and at least affords them the possibility of opening up to other days that are significant. And I understand your point about it being limited to days significant to Americans, I would support a language change to line 9 if you wanted to broaden that even further. So if there are any suggestions there. But I think that doesn't diminish the significance of these days, which is the intent of my motion, and doesn't change or limit our educators from commemorating or observing with their students other days that are significant. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hen. And I agree. And I think that would apply to those that have been revised at this time. Are there any other board members who would like to make comments or have questions?
This is Board Member Frimpong, just for clarification. So if we do not keep line numbers 25, 26, and 27, and they would fall under the other days of national significance instead of being explicitly listed, there's nothing that would prevent celebration or commemoration of those days. Is that correct, Dr. Kraft?
Yes, that is correct. And that was our intention, that we're not erasing them, but that would fall under that. And so we actually maintain a Schoology folder for all of these days where teachers can pull resources. And so that those would absolutely remain. We would not pull those resources. It just would fall under line 9, other days of national significance.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
May I have a roll call vote, please?
Ms. Frempong,
Can the motion be repeated? This is Ms. Hen's motion, correct? I just want it to be repeated so I'm clear.
Ms. Hen, will you repeat your motion so that we can be sure we have the exact wording? Thank you.
Sure, thank you. I move to amend policy 6304 by restoring on lines 25, 26, and 27, D-Day, Pearl Harbor Day, and Patriots Day.
May I have a roll call vote, please?
yes, ma'am.
Madam Chair, do we need a second? Pardon me.
It's already
Mr.
been
Lefty
seconded.
seconded.
I apologize. Thank you, ma'am.
Ms. Frempong,
No.
Ms. Harvey,
No.
Ms. Hen,
Yes.
Ms. Starosky,
Yes.
Ms. Chikakalu.
No.
Favor is 2.
Thank you. Miss Howie, will you need to excuse anyone before moving on?
Well, at this point, there needs to be consensus as to whether or not the full board or the full committee wishes the policy to proceed without the requested amendment. So the question is whether or not the policy is to proceed as recommended by staff at this point.
Is there consensus?
No.
No.
Okay. May I have a roll call vote, please? I'm sorry. May I have a motion for policy 6304 to proceed as recommended by staff?
This is student member Chike Kalu. I will make the motion to have the policy 6304 on commemorations and observances be moved forward from committee.
Is there a second?
Second from Pong.
Is there discussion? May I have a roll call vote, please?
Ms. Frempong,
Yes.
Ms. Harvey,
Yes.
Ms. Hen,
No.
Ms. Starosky,
No.
Ms. Chikakalu.
Yes.
favor 3.
Policy 6304 will move forward as recommended.
Madam Vice Chair, that is not a majority of members of the committee.
Oh, I apologize.
You have a 6-member committee.
6-member, you are right. It will not move forward.
Or it will move forward without recommendation.
It will move forward without recommendation.
That's been the practice that you employ with the Contracts Committee when there is not a majority of the members of the Contracts Committee.
Thank you. Is there anyone you'd like to excuse prior to moving
Yes.
forward?
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Kraft, if she could be excused, please.
Of course.
Thank you all. Have a great night.
Thank you. We will move forward with policy 6401, special programs, advanced academics, and gifted education. And for that, I call on Dr. DiDonato and staff as appropriate.
Thank you. And I'm going to turn it right over to Dr. Elmendorf and Mr. Kearns and Ms. Harv Brilliant.
Thank you, Dr. Giunato. I just want to give some context, and then certainly Mr. Kearns, Ms. Holly Briante can answer questions. But last time we reviewed this policy, we made some significant revisions. The recommendations this time around are not nearly as significant as last time, but Mr. Kearns and Ms. Holly Briante met with all of our stakeholders, including the GTCAC, to make some revisions, including updating some wording. And so we are putting this recommendation forth to you today. And Mr. Kearns and Ms. Holly Briante, since they conducted those stakeholder sessions, would be happy to take any questions you might have at this time. Thank you.
Are there any questions?
This is Board Member Frimpong.
Please proceed, Ms. Frimpong.
Thank you. For this one, it was specifically in Section 3. It is now Section B, formerly C, where the superintendent is providing this data about the advanced academic students. Are we also able to include identification in that section as well?
We certainly could include identification. By identification, do you mean the percentage of students who are identified as GT by student group, by demographic group, and so on?
Yes. So, for example, Dr. Elmendorf, if you were on I believe it was the GT advisory, and that was one of the things that we ended up talking about, and you were able to provide that information. So yes, I think that's something that would be helpful to see on an annual basis.
Yeah, I can say that that information is included in the data memo that we send forward each year, but you are correct in observing that it is not specified in the policy. So while it's in the report, it's not specified in the policy along with these other categories. So certainly if you would like to add it in the policy just to ensure that moving forward it continues to be included, I would certainly have no objection to that.
Thank you. Do I need to make a motion for that, Ms. Harvey, or is it just we'll do by consensus?
We'll see if we have consensus. Is there consensus to Ms. Frimpong's edit? Or is there any objection to Ms. Frimpong's edit? Hearing none, we will move forward with the edit. Are there other comments or questions?
And my apologies, members of the committee, where would you like the word identification added or inserted?
Okay. Section 3. Within the Section 3B, where it talks about the disaggregated data. Within that paragraph.
So line 30, I'm sorry,
Okay.
line 31.
Yes, line
Insert
31.
identification prior to the word student achievement. Is that the request?
Yes, that would be acceptable.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments regarding this policy? Hearing none, Ms. Howie, do you have staff that you'd like to excuse?
Yes, please. That would be Dr. Elmendorf, Mr. Kearns, and Dr. DiDonato, and then Ms. Hawley Briante.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move forward to policy 6500, research, testing and evaluation, research and assessment. And for that, I'll call on Mr. Connolly and team as appropriate.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Vice Chair Harvey and members of the board who are attending today. Joining me in this discussion are Dr. Asha Dagans, who is our Director of Assessment and Data Analytics, and Dr. Chrissy Koth, who is our Director of Research. Policy 6500, in accordance with Board of Education Policy and Superintendent's Rule 8130, is scheduled for review in this school year. Policy 6500 recognizes the importance of research and assessment and has been revised to include the review of all research studies. At our December 9th, 2024 PRC meeting, there were recommendations to strengthen the language addressing parental consent and student privacy concerns, and that has been addressed. One thing to note, per the committee's recommendation, paragraph 2D, page 2, lines 11 through 14, added the words, which asserts that all participation is voluntary and requires informed consent or informed parental consent and child consent. And that language is repeated several times throughout our policy and rule. Dr. Koth, is there any additional information you'd like to share?
I do want to point out that in the rule, and I appreciate the board's concern about parental consent. In the rule, we do specify that passive consent is not allowable, and passive consent is like an opt-out version of consent. So we do not allow passive consent, and that is stated in the rule. And there must be, to be involved in research, you must have informed consent or parental consent and child assent.
Thank you, Dr. Koth. At this time, our team is prepared to answer any questions the group may have.
Are there any board members that have questions? Hearing none, policy 6500 will move forward for first reader.
Thank you, members of the committee, and may the draw staff be excused.
Yes,
Thank you. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is immigration. And Ms. Pumphrey, Board Member Pumphrey, requested that this item be placed on the agenda because of recent executive orders concerning immigration enforcement and its potential impact on the school system. We've now passed a resolution covering this matter, and so Ms. Pumphrey wanted to discuss the necessity for a policy at this juncture. I am recommending that we postpone discussion of this to allow for Ms. Pumphrey to be present for the discussion, since this was her added agenda item. Is there any objection to that postponement? Hearing none, we will move this agenda item to the next PRC committee meeting. The next item on the agenda is for the good of, welfare. The floor is now open to members of the committee to discuss any issues or concerns. I must emphasize that this is not the time to conduct business, as there has not been notice provided as required by the Open Meetings Act. Before I get to other board members, I just want to clarify that policies 1270, 5550, 6401, and 6500 will be moving forward for first reader as recommendations by the committee, and policy 6304 will move forward with no recommendation. Are there any other issues or items for discussion at this time? Hearing none, the next item on the agenda is announcements. The next meeting of the Policy Review Committee is scheduled for Tuesday, April 1st, 2024 at 4:30. Because there is no further business, the meeting is now adjourned. Thank you all for your time and commitment. Have a good evening.
Thank you, committee
Thank you.
members.
Have a great
Thank you,
evening.
colleagues.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.